أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. We're going to continue on with the era of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. I think that we have arrived at page number 559. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq now had two letters to respond to, one from Madhur and the other from Al-Muthanna radiallahu anhu, and he had to handle the matter carefully in such a way that he would benefit from the services of both Madhur and Al-Muthanna, since both seemed to be able military men without hurting the feelings of either and without jeopardizing the overall mission of the conquering of Iraq. In his response to Madhur's letter, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wrote to proceed, I have received your letter and I have understood very clearly the matters you mentioned. You are indeed as you have described yourself to be, and your clan is a blessed and good clan. I have arrived at the conclusion that you should join Khalid ibn al-Walid's army. Stay with Khalid as long as he stays in Iraq, and when he departs, depart with him. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wrote the following to Al-Muthanna, quote, verily, your companion from Ijli clan wrote to me asking me about a number of matters. I wrote back to him ordering him to adhere to the company of Khalid ibn al-Walid until I decide what to do about the situation. In this letter of mine to you, I order you to remain in Iraq until Khalid ibn al-Walid departs from it. And when Khalid ibn al-Walid leaves Iraq, continue to stay in the place you were stationed. Indeed, you are deserving of an increase in blessings, and you are worthy of all virtues. Important lesson, facts, and morals regarding the previous situation. Khalid ibn al-Walid went to Iraq in the month of Rajab based on one account. However, he went not in Rajab but in Muharram. Although the month of his departure is a matter of disagreement, the year of his departure is not for all accounts confirmed that it took place in the year 12 AH. To be sure, Abu Bakr was a brilliant military strategist, a fact that is understood by his quick and decisive victories during the apostate wars. No less brilliant, however, were his plans to invade Iraq. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq lived in a relatively primitive world, a world that was not yet introduced to running water, electricity, gunpowder, computers, and the myriad of other things that have been discovered over the period of the last few hundred years. And yet it was as if Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was seated in a modern-day command center, one that was equipped with the latest digital maps. From Al-Madinah, he sent word to Khalid ibn al-Walid and Iyad radiallahu anhuma, telling them what roads they should take to enter Al-Iraq. He ordered one of them to enter from the southwestern part of Iraq and the other from the northeastern part of Al-Iraq. It was an ideal mode of entry, one that kept the enemy engaged from two fronts. Furthermore, it allowed both Muslim armies to gather together in central Iraq and to thus consolidate their forces and work as a team to completely bring down the enemy. Also, in choosing Al-Hira as a meeting place between his two armies, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq showed a profound understanding of Iraq's geography. From a military perspective, Al-Hira was strategically perhaps the most important city in Al-Iraq. To take control of it was deemed a great victory. Al-Hira was important for a number of reasons. First, it was located near some of the major cities in Iraq. It was situated 3 miles outside of Kufa, and it will take a rider only a single day to travel from Al-Hira to Al-Najaf. Second, if one looked at a 7th century map of Iraq, one would find that Al-Hira connected all of the roads and traveling routes, from all directions of Iraq. To the east, it was connected to Madain, and by way of the Euphrates River to the north, it was connected by way of road to Heat. By way of the Anbar bridge, it was connected to Anbar. To the west, it was connected by way of a road to Asham, Syria, and the surrounding regions. Similarly, it was connected to Al-Abla in the region of Basra, to Kaskar, to As-Sawad, and to Normania. Third, because of the topography of the region, whoever gained control of Al-Hira automatically gained control of all of the land that was situated west of the Euphrates. Fourth, perhaps most important of all, Al-Hira was the nearest major city to Al-Madain, which was the capital of the Persian Empire. The Persians were all too aware of the strategic importance of Al-Hira, as was made clear by their many attempts to regain control of it. For Muslims, besides being strategically important in Iraq, Al-Hira acted as a launching point from which Muslims armies attacked the Romans in the lands of Asham. Number 3, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu felt that, participation in Iraq's invasion should be a voluntary matter, and so he ordered the 2 commanders to refrain from forcing anyone to join their armies. Furthermore, if any person under their command wanted to return to Arabia, they were to give him full permission to return. The fourth thing is not only in his enthusiasm to fight, but also in his humility. Al-Muthanna ibn al-Harith was one of the key Muslim heroes of the conquest of Iraq. With the help of his people, Al-Muthanna fought battles in Iraq even before Abu Bakr as-Siddiq decided to launch an all-out invasion of the Persian Empire. When Abu Bakr as-Siddiq found out about Muthanna's activities in the region, he became at once pleased with and impressed by Al-Muthanna's. Consequently, he appointed Al-Muthanna ibn al-Harith as the overall leader of the Muslim armed forces in Iraq. But when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq made his decision to invade Persia itself, he radiallahu anhu decided that the overall leader of the Muslim armed forces in Iraq should be none other than the notorious Khalid ibn al-Walid and not Al-Muthanna. And so he wrote a letter to Al-Muthanna ordering him to join ranks with the approaching Muslim army and to obey Khalid ibn al-Walid. Al-Muthanna, had he been proud or boastful like people are today, in the least, would have had reason to be upset. After all, through his own efforts, he had managed to mobilize a formidable army of fighters, and he had been fighting for the cause of conquering Iraq longer than anyone else. And yet, because of his humbleness, he radiallahu anhu was not hurt. Moreover, he did not delay, but instead hastened to obey Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu's command by joining the ranks of Khalid's army. In gathering soldiers for war, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was interested not so much in forming a large army as he was in forming an army that consisted purely of sincere Muslims. Therefore, he radiallahu anhu ordered his generals to enlist two kinds of Muslims. First, those who had fought against the apostate, and second, those who, even if they had not fought against the apostates, had at least remained steadfast upon al-Islam. This implied the exclusion of a third category, people who had actually apostatized, even if they later returned to the fold of Islam. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq then made this implication explicit with his words, and do not take along for this invasion any person who had apostatized, at least not until I arrive at a final decision regarding the matter. Based on these instructions, former apostates did not take part in the early stages of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's foreign wars and invasions. Later on, however, when it became clear that they were sincere and dedicated to al-Islam, they were given permission to take part in foreign conquests, and this is a topic we will discuss later on. Inshallah, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was faced with a difficult choice, either to hurt the feelings of the few of those who had apostatized by forbidding them from taking part in foreign conquests, or to jeopardize the overall mission of the conquest by sending soldiers whose sincerity was in question. After all, it was depending on individual cases only months, weeks, or days earlier that apostates had repented and returned to al-Islam. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq chose the former option, knowing that if Muslims were going to topple the governments of foreign empires, they needed strong faith, sincere, and determination more than they needed numbers. Apostates had shown in the past that their goals were worldly in nature. Were worldly in nature. So some of them wanted power, others wealth, and yet others fame. The true Muslim soldier, the type that was needed in Iraq, was one who fought for none of those things, but instead to raise the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, above all things. In his message to Khalid, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wrote, and win over the hearts of the people of Persia and of the people who live within their realm. The statement, as corroborated by the actions of Abu Bakr's armies, proves that the primary goal of fighting foreign empires was not to subjugate people, but to free them from the shackles of disbelief and tyranny. As long as tyrannical governments remain in power, Muslims will not be able to preach the message of Islam to the average Persian or Roman citizens. Therefore, those governments had to be removed by force. Muslims had no qualms with citizens of foreign lands. In fact, I have no quarrels, is it? In fact, once a group of people entered into the fold of Islam, they automatically became equals with their Muslim brothers in Yemen, Mecca, and even Al-Madinah. They then had the same rights and duties that their Muslim brothers had over all the Muslim, or the same rights that Muslims had all over the world. If some individuals refused to embrace Islam, they were not coerced into embracing Islam. Rather, they were allowed to remain upon their religion as long as they paid the jizya tax. The jizya tax worked to their favor. The tax consisted of a small amount of money, and in return for it, a non-Muslim could retain their religion, live in Muslim lands, and enjoy a guarantee of safety and protection from the Muslim government. It was when non-Muslims refused the first two options, accept Islam or pay the jizya, that Muslims fought against them for the purpose of raising the word of Allah above all else. In his letters to the commanders, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq continually reiterated the importance of being gentle with and winning over the hearts of the masses of foreign citizens in general, and of the farmers in particular. Muslims sought to strengthen foreign lands and not to destroy them or their infrastructure, and the people who had the most valuable wealth of foreign nations in their hands, food, were farmers. As such, it was important to win over their hearts so that once Islamic rule was put in place in a given country, the country's economy would not suffer as a result of no one working in farms, fields, and gardens. Bakr Siddiq had a great deal of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu had a great deal of prescience when it came to evaluating the makeup and value of individuals. Perhaps there is no better example of that than when Khalid ibn al-Walid, while on his way to Iraq, asked Abu Bakr Siddiq to send reinforcements. Rather than send a battalion of fighters, Abu Bakr Siddiq sent a single man by the name of Qaqa ibn Amr at-Tamimi. Someone asked Abu Bakr Siddiq about the point of sending not a battalion of fighters but a single soldier. Abu Bakr Siddiq replied, and I quote, "An army does not lose when it contains the likes of this man, this one man." The events that later took place in Iraq and the defeat of Al-Qaqa on the battlefield confirmed the fact that Abu Bakr Siddiq was a good judge of people's character, qualities, talents, and skills. The second part is on page number 565. Khalid ibn al-Walid's battles in Al-Iraq. When Khalid arrived, radiallahu anhu, he had traveled towards Al-Iraq. He took with him 2,000 fighters, all of whom had fought in battles against the apostates. He further mobilized 8,000 fighters from the tribe of Rabi'a along the way. He wrote to 3 Muslim leaders, each of whom was already stationed in Al-Iraq. Those 3 leaders were Madhur ibn Adi al-Ijli, Sulma ibn al-Qin at-Tamimi, and Harmala ibn Murbata at-Tamimi radiallahu anhum ajma'in. They wrote back informing him that they were awaiting his arrival. Also, they merged into a single army, one that, along with Al-Musanna's army, consisted of 8,000 soldiers. Therefore, the overall army of Khalid consisted of 18,000 soldiers. It was agreed that all of the above-mentioned soldiers would meet at a place called Al-Ubla. Prior to arriving in Iraq, Khalid radiallahu anhu wrote a letter to Hormuz, the leader of the Persian battalion that was, the leader of the Persian battalion, that was stationed in Al-Ubla. It was a warning letter that contained the following message: to proceed, embrace Islam, and thereby achieve safety, or take protection for yourself and your people and agree to pay the jizya tax. Otherwise, blame no one save yourself, for indeed I have come to you with a people who love death just as you love life. To be sure, this letter was a form of psychological warfare, end quotes. To be sure that this letter was a form of psychological warfare through which Khalid hoped to instill fear into Hormuz's heart. After all, throughout history, it has not been often that an army met a foe that loved death more than life itself. As Khalid drew nearer toward the enemy, he divided his armies into 3 battalions, ordering each one to travel by a different road. The first was headed by Al-Muthanna ibn al-Haritha, second by Adi ibn Hatim at-Ta'i radiallahu anhu, and the third by Khalid himself radiallahu anhu. The 3 battalions were to meet up at a place called Al-Hudayr, which was situated approximately 4 miles outside of Mecca. The Battle of Dat as-Salasil, Hormuz somehow learned about his enemy's plan. He knew both that Khalid's army was drawing nearer and that the Muslims had agreed to meet at Al-Hudayr, 4 miles. How can it? So, reacting immediately to this information, he set out with his 2 commanders, Kubaz and Abu Shuja'an, and arrived at Al-Hudayr before the enemy did. It was a battle of wits between Khalid and Hormuz. For as soon as Khalid heard about Hormuz's arrival at Hudayr, he changed his course and led his army towards a place called Kazima. But again, Hormuz was 1 step ahead of him and was able to arrive there first. Hormuz made camp beside the only water source of Qadima. When Khalid arrived on the scene, he made camp at the best spot possible, but without water source. He was clearly at a disadvantage. He radiallahu anhu was left with one choice, and that was to try to win over the water source. And so he said to his soldiers, "Put down your heavy supplies and then fight them for the water source. For indeed the most patient and most noble of the 2 armies will gain control over it." The Muslims unloaded their heavy supplies, their horsemen stood their ground, and their infantrymen marched forward toward the enemy. By His grace and mercy, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu blessed Muslims with a single cloud that poured rain upon their rows of soldiers. They all drank from the rainwater and thus gained the strength they needed to face the enemy. This occurrence, the appearance of a single cloud that poured rain down upon the Muslim army, is just one of many examples that illustrate the meaning of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu being with His believing slaves. Before any fighting commenced, Hormuz, an evil man who was known for his complete lack of scruples, challenged Khalid to a duel. On the inside, however, Hormuz had no intention on actually fighting against Khalid. He simply wanted to set a trap for him, to have him killed through treacherous means, and to thus demoralize the enemy. As the soldiers of both armies stood indoors facing the enemy, Khalid and Hormuz both came forward. When the 2 of them met, they exchanged blows, after which Khalid managed to lock Hormuz in an embrace. Meanwhile, according to their plan, Hormuz's guards surrounded Khalid, and yet their presence did not divert Khalid from the task at hand of killing Hormuz. All the while, Al-Qaqa ibn Amr at-Tamimi was watching every move of the enemy. Being thus prepared, he, radiallahu anhu, with a group of Muslim horsemen sprang into action once Hormuz's guard interrupted the duel. That is when the fighting began in the earnest. Al-Qaqa and his men handled Hormuz's guards. Khalid ibn al-Walid killed Hormuz, and the Muslim soldiers entered into an attack mode, neither holding their ground nor retreating, but instead piercing straight through the ranks of the opposing army. The momentum gained by the Muslim army was too powerful to overturn, and it was a matter of only a short amount of time before the battle ended in their favor. The victory that day began with the brave work of Al-Qaqa, about whom Abu Bakr Siddiq correctly said, "An army does not lose when it contains the likes of this man." Khalid too was a noble member of the Muslim army that day, for he killed not only the enemy's leader Hormuz, but also, with the help of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, Al-Qaqa, Hormuz's guards were also killed, and Allah Ta'ala sent the cloud. At the beginning of the battle, Persian fighters, as they stood in rows, tied one another with chains so as to prevent themselves from fleeing the scene of the battle. But faced with the reality of having to fight against brave and fierce fighters, their strategy availed them not in the least. The word for the chains in Arabic is salasil. And so, because of that strategy employed by them. The battle is known as the Battle of Dat As-Salasil. The quality or quantity of war booty the Muslims gained that day was so large that it had to be loaded onto 100 camels. Once Muslims had secured the scene of battle, Khalid sent small units of soldiers to conquer enemy fighters, or to conquer enemy fighters who had held themselves up in fortresses that surrounded Al-Hira. Once Muslim soldiers rested, or once they seized control of those fortresses, they gained even more war booty. War booty, as much as was won by the Muslims that day, was not an unlimited quantity of wealth. After all, Abu Bakr's instructions had been clear. Khalid was to be gentle with the people of Persia, particularly with farmers. Khalid obeyed Abu Bakr's instructions to the letter, particularly regarding farmers who had not taken part in the battle. Khalid allowed them to keep their land and their crops. He radiallahu anhu then mentioned the amount of zakah that was to be paid by those among them that embraced al-Islam. As for those that remained upon their religion, Khalid informed them about the jizya tax. They had to pay a tax. It should be noted that was far less than the amount that farmers had to pay in the past to their Persian overlords. Most importantly, Khalid radiallahu anhu did not dispose of any Persian citizen of his land, his crops, or his belongings, thus making them all feel like they were valued, albeit new members of the Muslim nation. 1/5 of these spoils Khalid sent to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq in Al-Madinah. The rest he radiallahu anhu distributed among his soldiers. Among the things Khalid sent to Abu Bakr was a hood that belonged to Hormuz. Upon receiving it, however, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent it back to Khalid, informing him that it was a reward for his brave feast on the battlefield. Perhaps unknown to both Abu Bakr and Khalid, the hood turned out to be worth 100,000 dinars or dirhams. At any rate, a huge sum. It was embroidered with valuable jewels. But that alone did not make the hood so valuable. Hoods in Persia were individualized, and honor of its owner. Hoods that belonged to the highest class of people in Persia were valued at 100,000, and since Hormuz was deemed a man of the most superior lineage, his hood was worth that amount. Inshallah, we will stop here. We will pick it up next from page number 569. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسم ربك وتعالى جدك ولا إله غيرك ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.